So 2 years ago, I first started obsessing over languages in the form of Vietnamese first. And that became only more accelerated of a desire at the start of actually last year. However, I did formally start beginning Vietnamese as a language to study within 2023. I think it was halfway through, so maybe give an extra 3 to 4 months from this point, and it would be exactly 2 years ago I started learning Vietnamese, or just trying to know and understand the language. That's because where I work right now, and where I've worked for the last 2 to 3 years, I believe it's been 3 years now as well. Sorry, I'm not really good with understanding when everything was, unless I have specific photos or videos associated to the memory. I just generally know what happened. So I'd always had that fundamental interest in languages and culture in the form of German. However, through engaging with certain language learning apps such as Duolingo, I began to think that the issue itself with studying a language was that specific language. However, as I have come to realize and will talk about now, is that it's not actually the language's fault, it's just the means of how you study. And specifically for me, Duolingo did not solve my problem, so it only acted as something to create more problems for me. So coming from that app, I'd gone all over the place with language learning apps. I started speaking some Vietnamese at work, and my coworkers were really surprised and quite happy. So that gave me a really strong desire to find a proper way to study the language, just so I could engage with them more consistently on an everyday basis. And still to this day, I use Vietnamese. However, it's not my main focus in terms of language learning. That's not particularly relevant right now. Just, extra context, just in case I've released videos future from this point, or I've talked about other languages. It's just how many fucking languages is this motherfucker going after? At that time, though, yes, I was specifically only trying to learn Vietnamese, and I'd come across one app which was far more helpful than any other method I'd come across beforehand, and that app was called Pimsleur. And so basically within Pimsleur, if you're unfamiliar with it, it is an audio-based language learning app. So you'll listen in on these, I believe they're called lessons. I'm not certain though, because theoretically there's the different segments within a particular language learning course. So I think for Japanese there was 5 levels. I'm pretty sure they might have just been called levels, and then within the levels was the specific lesson. For Vietnamese, unfortunately, there was only one level, and that was containing 30 lessons. So I got through that relatively fast, basically doing one lesson every day. If I had problems with that lesson, I'd play it over the following day, and I was able to pick up the language in a more realistic way than I had from previous experiences with language learning apps. So I was quite satisfied initially, until obviously I got to the end of the level and had no other content to refer upon to study Vietnamese, and it felt like the only way I was going to further my knowledge of the language was by going back to Duolingo and having to engage with all these apps that I'd already had not the most positive connection with. And it was around this time where I was really pondering what method I should use. However, languages wasn't the main obsession within my life at the time. It was just a relatively small interest of mine, so I guess if I had had more of an interest, I would have discovered the method in which I'll be talking about within this video far sooner, and it would have been really beneficial for me. However, I can't go back and change time, so it's like I'm just grateful that right now I've come to the conclusions that I have with language learning and how to properly study, and through using which method, which is the most impactful element in choosing how in just language study to begin with, because you can apply the method that I'll speak about to basically any language in the world, and it will allow you to pick up the language really fast in an enjoyable way, which basically was completely different from any other method, particularly the apps that I engage with, but I guess that also extends to traditional language learning in the case of, what you'll be taught in school, university. I had that experience with Japanese, 6 years in school. Japanese, it's not the teacher's fault, it's just the fundamental understanding of how we pick up languages was not on display, and thus it was basically 6 years of wasted potential and wasted time. And unfortunately, I think bro's still going at it, still teaching, and unfortunately no one's graduating knowing really anything about languages, knowing anything about Japanese. And the funniest thing is, I know far more Japanese right now than basically, I would argue, anyone who's graduated from my school in the history of my school. I can make that claim because where I graduated, there's no one. Like, my graduation class, there was like 18 people. There was not that many people. I come from a small town in Western Australia, for extra context. So I feel like I can make that claim pretty strongly, and I'm not even like anywhere near fluency within Japanese. I can just comprehend a lot by eventually finding the method in which I'll speak upon. So yeah, I was still pondering with Vietnamese, what method should I focus on now? Should I just go through the PIMSA courses again so I can remember stuff better? Like, how can I go about studying a language now that I've basically just run out of access to more content from the specific tool that I was finding a lot of value in? And I think I pondered for about 2 or 3 months, and that's when it became the new year. And it was really, really impactful to me. In February of last year, I ended up going on a trip. I've actually mentioned this in my last video, so I'll kind of speed through this, but for anyone who's new watching this video, you'll still have enough context so that everything isn't too muddy. I went on this trip with some of my Vietnamese co-workers down south of where I live, about 8 hours, and I stayed with a Vietnamese family for one night, and I was the only Australian present within the house. Everyone else was ethnically Vietnamese, speaking fluent Vietnamese for about 4 hours at the dinner table with me, and I was just completely sucked in the whole time to just how they were speaking, even though I didn't understand a single thing they were saying. Well, not a single thing. Like, I heard some things repeated over and over and over again to like have some kind of inquiry about them at the end of the night, asking some of my Vietnamese friends the following day, hey, I heard that, what does that mean? What can I give as an example? I think it was "and gam" means like ice cream or something. Maybe I've pronounced that wrong, but I inquired about that because I heard that a lot. I was like, wait, what? And I was like, they said ice cream, and I'm like, what? Is that right? Maybe I got that wrong. But because of that, like that word particularly will never get out of my head. Maybe I pronounced it wrong, so I'll still have some kind of development with understanding the word on a deeper level, but I still generally remember it just because of that experience. And no, I didn't know what it meant whilst I was kind of just sucked in, immersing into the conversation which I was hearing. But that is what kickstarted my fundamental interest with languages. And so instead of obsessing over just trying to master Vietnamese, because it was quite a niche language, the next day what I did was I went back onto Pimsleur, and I was just like, you know what? What's a more long-term language that I can engage with and really build up the skill set within to where I can start speaking it with people, even though they won't be necessarily in my current environment on the level that Vietnamese is. I go to work every day, well, not every single day, but every day that I do go to work, I engage in Vietnamese with my co-workers. There will be at least one person there who is speaking Vietnamese who I'll be able to engage with, you know. And sometimes it can be a bit corny just randomly speaking Vietnamese, so I only do it when it's contextually necessary, or I guess I want to and it doesn't feel too weird to do so. But basically that following day I'd really just thought deeply and gone, you know what, unfortunately Vietnamese is a bit low-key for me right now. It's like, how can I don't know how I can study this language outside of Pimsleur. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to either choose between Mandarin Chinese or Japanese, and I'd listen to the first lesson of each respective level 1 for both Mandarin Chinese, so lesson 1, and then level 1 for Japanese, lesson 1. And I think it took like a week or two to really go back and forth, because I was really, like, there's two, even though the languages so not to say that they're really similar, because I don't think they are whatsoever, asides the kanji and hanzi, that is really the only crossover in my opinion. They're both Southeast Asian languages, and yeah, there'll be like some other crossovers, like in terms of how stuff is generally pronounced for one or two more hanzi, but that's a bit deep and unrelated, and I didn't know that at the time. Let's just say I went on within last year to then further my understanding of Mandarin Chinese to a little bit, and same with Japanese. I basically ended up choosing upon Japanese within the 2 weeks of pondering, and I stuck with Japanese until about November or October of last year. So it was quite a while. Yeah, so from March till October of generally focusing on just locking in on Japanese. So I settled it. I was like, yeah, I'm going to learn Japanese, because initially I was like, actually, can I learn 2 languages at once? And I was trying to do that with Pimsleur, but it just became too much work for me. So I was just like, you know what, I'm going to lock in with Japanese. So I started with Japanese, was doing 1 Pimsleur lesson a day, sometimes 2, I think, or repeating certain lessons just to be able to speak aloud new words that I was hearing, and just basically it felt like I was acquiring new information very effortlessly through just getting on my bike on my commute to work. I'd ride in, I'd listen. On my way back home after work, I'd ride back and listen as well. And usually that would be around at least 30 minutes of active listening every day, 30 minutes to 60 minutes. It would really depend on what I was doing. If I was riding my bike around town or anything, I'd still be listening and tuning in. So it was like that for, I think, the first month and a half or 2 months. And I was just basically, after, I think I got halfway through the second level. So I'd passed the first level, got to the second level, and I got to about lesson 14 or 15. And I was just really demotivated and I didn't know why. I was just like, you know what? There's some level of rigidity to how Pimsleur uses the new words in the new contexts and introduces certain words to you. Like, I learned suizokukan, which means fucking aquarium in Japanese. Am I ever really gonna need to know that? I don't even need to know the word aquarium in fucking English, and I know that in Japanese thanks to goddamn Pimsleur. And like saying other stupid shit in Japanese to me, basically just teaching me less important information from the start. But I think, ironically, because of the absolute wild unimportance of suizokukan and just how random that was to me, that's why that word's particularly sticked. But I'll talk about that a bit later to connect it to the method in which I'm focused on using right now. So, yeah, basically, it took for me to reflect upon learning. I'll just write them off as pretty much useless words to use at a beginner level. I don't want to say, like, the word aquarium in English is useless, because every word has its use case. It's just, you know, it's probably worth more focusing on other words, at least as a beginner, than that. And it's like, why the fuck did I get taught that? It just felt like such a waste of mental effort. But it's like, I can't go back now. I know that word. But it was trying to do that with like a bunch of other words as well, I had felt. So I was like, fuck. Is this it? Now I've bored myself going through Pimsleur. Everything's becoming dull again, you know, just like with Duolingo. How is this happening? So I was just really confused, and because by that point I'd actually been prioritizing languages within my life and language learning quite a lot. I was doing some research, and I think it was one night. It was basically 12 o'clock at night. I was just on YouTube. I was watching a bunch of videos on how to learn languages and whatnot. I'm not sure if that's what I specifically was searching up on YouTube and the results that I got. But the result that I got changed my life. And I talked about it in my last video, and I'll probably link the video again. I found this video from a guy called Jeff Brown. That's not his YouTube name, but it was under the account Polyglot a lot. I really wish I specifically learnt/acquired the title so I could refer to it in perfection and be like, word for word, be able to tell you what it was. But it was generally speaking about how to acquire a language, not learn it. I'm pretty sure that's what it was titled anyway. Something along the lines of that. And it was, I think it was a 50-minute to an hour long video, so it was quite long. I was watching through it. It looked a bit old from the thumbnail, so I wasn't sure if I really wanted to watch it. But I was just like, you know what? Fuck it. I'll just keep watching it. And I got really sucked into the concepts that were brought up within that video. It changed my whole mindset towards language overnight. I was just like, what? Or just learning in general, but particularly in regards to how we learn languages, which had been replaced in my mind with the word acquisition and acquiring. So, I still was a bit muddy to that concept upon watching the video. It's like, what does acquisition actually refer to? And it took some time for me to acquire the concept per se. But when I finally understood what it meant, I was just like, oh my goodness, this transforms everything for me. This means that now I can apply this to my current language position and capitalize off of subconscious comprehension rather than having to consciously focus on everything. Because that's the difference between learning and acquisition. Is not to say that all acquisition is done. I'm just thinking of the theories that Stephen Krashen brought up. I'm pretty sure all acquisition relatively is on the basis of some kind of subconscious connection, but I'm not going to say that with 100% certainty. Just from my understanding of what acquisition is at the moment, is basically your brain's capacity. It's not even just your brain, it's your whole nervous system basically changing, going through the process of what's called neuroplasticity to open to new information, make sense of the world around you, usually using one or more senses to like connect to some form of unknowingness and build a familiarity and find comprehension in what it is that is, hard to understand. It's how, as babies, we grow up and we can just speak the language that we can. It might be a bit hard for us to obviously read the language going into school and everything, because that's definitely a more learning, conscious-based activity. But over time, you'll basically acquire the letters within the alphabet you're studying, and you're able to just easily read anything. Like me right now, I have my... actually, I don't even know why I have my monitor up, but it has like basically just a page full of words in English, and it's like I can read it very fucking easily, very instantaneously. Did I have to consciously focus on absolutely all of that? Or at least in my current position, did I have to consciously read every letter to just understand the words? Of course not. It's acquired over time. However, in the case of the written language within any language, it is definitely a more learning-based, like to understand the writing system relies upon learning it to a greater extent than what you would really need to do if you're a baby trying to. You wouldn't even have to try, and that's the thing. It's like you're just acquiring the language as you go. You're being presented all this information in certain contexts, and the senses within your body, your neuros. What is it? Did I just say it? The system. God damn it. Brain, spine. What the hell is neuroplasticity again? I forget what the system's called. Just nervous system. Fuck's sake, not central nervous system. That's your brain, but your nervous system. It's the capacity for your nervous system to basically undergo change, and through leaning on particular senses to find meaning in what's before you. You don't have to consciously study those points. Your nervous system kind of subconsciously does it for you. All you need to do is just have your senses presented before you, before whatever it is that is an unknown variable in which your mind has subconsciously distinguished to be important. And that's basically why any information is acquired to the rate in which it is. It's a distinguishment of what's important versus what isn't. Anyways, so I'll kind of just zoom out for a second. Stop getting into the specificity of everything with acquisition, because it took a while for me to really come to that conclusion on what acquisition specifically was. But yeah, that's the difference. Is learning is predominantly conscious. You go to school, you learn, you study concepts. You don't generally acquire it, and that's why I had such a problem with languages within school and with Japanese, because that was the only language that we were taught. I was with the same group of classmates across every single class within both my primary and high school years. So in Japanese, we'd been with each other for 6 years straight trying to make sense of stuff, and still we'd turn to each other and just be like, what the hell is going on? Like, we don't know anything. We didn't know anything except, I'm assuming, considering how much it came up, we knew how to generally read the alphabet, and I think that's the best thing you can really come away from in the traditional language learning sense, is the alphabet of a language, because it's like we went to school to learn how to read and write in English, or at least predominantly most of the people viewing this video. That's just an assumption, or whatever your mother tongue is, whatever your main language is, or wherever you come from, you know, whatever school you went into, whichever was the prime language being used within the society at the time, you'd probably learn how to read and write it. There would be a strong emphasis on it. There wasn't as much of a strong emphasis on Japanese because it was only 2 hours every week, whereas, you know, English class, I think, was like, would have to have been at least 4 hours every week, I think. From like, I don't even know when I started fucking learning how to read and write in English, since like the age of 4 or 5. Who knows? I don't know. See, it all just whooshed by me. But I feel like most of you wouldn't be able to pinpoint the exact time and where you got exposed to the writing system and started consciously learning it. Anyways, back on to the topic at hand. Learning, more conscious-based. Acquisition, more subconscious-based. And, you know, your senses kind of do all the work for you. It's just a matter of presenting yourself to information that's important. Because if it's not important, you won't retain it over time. I can go into like a big ass explanation of what distinguishes important information from unimportant information. Let's just say that if I got more words like suizoku-kan taught to me, and then just never brought up outside of that context in which it was brought up, that generally won't be as important for my mind to acquire that particular information at this given time. It's not, you know, make or break my connection with Japanese. So I think of it like that. It's like, what is the highest ROI for the vocabulary and the grammar that I'm going to be studying on a day-to-day basis as a beginner? You know, what's the most important stuff for me to acquire? And I kind of was pondering about this initially when I was thinking of like how to acquire a language, but I didn't know what specific method to use. You know, I heard about acquisition. It's just like, how do I use it in my life? Because the way that Jeff Brown, particularly within that video that I'll put in the description, wasn't very practical. Like, I couldn't act upon the exact things that he was doing within that video, at least in my position. There's only one fucking Japanese person who lives in my goddamn town, and that's the teacher, the Japanese teacher. He's the only Japanese person that I see. Sometimes I don't see him for like 3 fucking months. So I was just like, yeah, okay, like it's gonna be, I guess I could reach out to him, but like personally I would have rather to not do that, so I didn't, and I still haven't. But I will speak to him every time usually he'll come into the bakery in which I'm working at, and I'll greet him in Japanese and everything like that, just to show him that, like, you know, I still have some knowledge of Japanese, regardless of context though. So, getting back into everything. I knew what acquisition was, I just didn't know how to properly work upon it. And that's where, going through YouTube videos again, come across a YouTuber by the name of Matt vs. Japan. And I understand that the method that he's using to study languages is called immersion. And I was like, oh, what's that? And particularly because he was learning Japanese and he was American. Those aren't the only fucking 2 variables, Jesus Christ. To constitute what I was about to say is, basically, bro's just a weeb. He just watches a bunch of fucking anime, But it's a personal preference thing. It doesn't, like, your demographic does not constitute whether you're a weeb or not. Personally, I don't see myself as a weeb and never will see myself as a weeb. However, upon just his influence, I had the inclination to want to go and watch Japanese content. And I started off with anime. And the particular anime that I was watching to immerse in was quite interesting. It was fun, enjoyable, and I didn't hate the process. Holy shit. And I ended up doing that for a very long time. However, I did have my ups and downs, and I actually covered everything in which you'd probably think I'd speak about next in my last video. Basically, I just want to focus on what helped me the whole way through starting my immersion journey, my acquisition immersion journey. There was problems with acquisition that came up afterwards. However, I still use these tools, and I think I'm pretty sure I used these from day one when trying to immerse in Japanese. So also at the same time that I had gotten introduced to Matt vs. Japan, I also got introduced to another YouTuber who I highly respect, who I watch his content quite a lot just to get a general consensus of, like, he best reflects how I view languages and learning languages. However, he's once again specific to Japanese. His name's Jouzu Juls. Jules, why do I try and pronounce that in Japanese? And then his Jouzu Juls, that's the fucking, like, intro, holy shit. Yeah, anyway, Jouzu Juls. I watched his videos quite a lot, and I think he ended up bringing up one of the tools that he uses for immersion, because he, like Matt vs. Japan, was using immersion to study and get good at Japanese. Long story short, I'm pretty sure he's Japanese. What's the test? He's not Japanese, god damn it. He's JLPT N1 level. Like, he passed that exam, I think, a year or two ago. From memory, I'll just say at least a year ago. So yeah, he's fluent. I'd say he's fluent. If you know anything about that test and the requirements to go in, basically you'll come to the conclusion that, yeah, he's probably fluent. And the predominant way in which he acquired Japanese was through immersion. However, you know, he still had to do some other stuff, like I detailed in my last video, which is including, like, intentional study regarding grammar points and concepts that you don't understand. Like, still incorporate that. However, it's very much an 80-20 kind of allocation, and even then, once you get more advanced in the language, it's like you're hardly even focusing on those grammar concepts, because you'll already be at that level, and where you understand so much about the language, it's just, fuck's sake. So I'm going to be completely honest, my camera literally just overheated. Actually, I overheated about 5 minutes ago. I've made sure to take notes of what I last said, and hopefully it doesn't overheat within the next 30 minutes again, but not gonna lie, I'm sweating where I am. I live in fucking Australia, mate, and this shit sucks. Without an aircon, like, shit sucks. I don't live in the fucking climate for this camera to be recording for long enough times. So yeah, plus I don't know why I put that fucking accent on. I probably just cringed out like a bunch of fellow other Australians. You'll probably start to doubt that I'm Australian at all after this. Regardless, let's get back to the point at hand. So I was talking about immersion, grammar study, all that, and I think I was talking generally along the lines of, once you get to like a intermediate advanced level within the language learning process, language learning acquisition process, the need for like intentional grammar study / structure study will become like far less required. You know, you won't have to stress about it, because you would have already been exposed to a lot of grammar concepts in which you will have likely already become familiar with by that point in the language, so it will just generally be less important for you to just go on YouTube. However, you might have the occasional word that has a little bit of nuance behind, in which watching a video or two on that explain the use case or whatever really is the problem, getting to the bottom of it outside of the immersion content will be extremely helpful. Now, there was one other variable that I think I brought up yesterday as well, but I didn't talk about it in much detail because it wasn't, and it still shouldn't really be the main focus of how you acquire a language. However, through having access to it, it is extremely, extremely helpful. And this is something that even if I don't do immersion every day, even if I don't do grammar study every day, I will always do this every day. And, it's just paving the road for fluency for me, basically. It keeps me accountable to the language learning / acquisition process. I swear, every time I have to correct myself saying that shit, I get so annoyed. I almost want to just be like, yeah, trying to understand a language, but then I'd have to choose between either term, language learning or language acquisition. So I'm just like, whatever. But yeah, so what I'm talking about is the integration of using a flashcard software. Now, for Thai, in which I'm studying Thai right now, it's a bit more of a niche language, and so I have to use a different software that actually plugs into the content that I'll be immersing with, and I watch everything that I watch over Netflix. And this tool works just fine. It's called Language Reactor. I'll talk more about it in a bit, but considering most of you watching this video probably won't be learning Thai, I would bet that you'd have more connection with this other tool that I'll bring up. However, I still will talk about Anki, just not as much, because the first thing that generally most people already familiar with flashcard software will think about is Anki. Now, I use Anki, once again, for Thai, but that's just because the tool that I use doesn't have an integrated flashcard system within it. However, the other tool that I use for more mainstream languages such as Japanese, Mandarin Chinese, they even added support for Vietnamese. And this was like a full circle moment for me. Like, I think it happened about a week or two ago, and I would have checked it out like a week ago from now and seen that they added support for Vietnamese as well, and I was jumping up and down. I was just like, holy shit, no way. Like, if I had this back when I really, really wanted to study Vietnamese, like, I'd probably be fluent. No joke. Or at least that would open the doors for me so much, in where I was quite restricted with PIMSA or just my whole mindset towards using a language learning app or just relying upon the traditional language learning methods. So this tool that I am talking about right now is called Migaku, and I am fucking surprised. It is still very underrated within the language acquisition community. You'll hear certain YouTubers like Jouzu Juls talk about it. Who else talks about it? I think Livakivi, if that's how you say his name, or Livakivi. I don't know what his name is. It's been a while since I've watched that channel. Uses Anki and Migaku as well, so I think he uses like an older version of Migaku that didn't have the flashcard software built into it. However, the new version of Migaku does have the flashcard software that like is equivalent to Anki built within the actual app, and that makes it so much more convenient for me if I will ever go back to Japanese, to Mandarin Chinese, which I will after Thai, or like at a point within my language learning process for Thai, and where I feel the motivation, desire to, go outwards and back to certain languages in which I've engaged with before and want to engage with to a greater degree. There's also more support than just Japanese, Chinese that I'm talking about right now. However, I'll go more into detail about that later. Basically, it covers the main languages used within the world. Main with an asterisk. Like right now, it still doesn't have support for Arabic. However, I think they're working upon that. Same with Russian. Don't have support for Indonesian yet. But they do have support for Spanish, Portuguese, German, French, Cantonese, Mandarin Chinese, Japanese, Vietnamese, English. You know, just in case you're not native, fluent English speaker, you know, you can learn more English via that way. And what's the last? Korean. So 10 languages that it supports right now. No. Yeah, 10. Not. Because before it was 9 and then Vietnamese got added. So yeah, 10 right now as I'm speaking. Since when I last checked, I think 2 or 3 days ago. Which is pretty good. You know, it covers the main languages. However, you know, if you're learning a more niche language, please tell me. Let me know in the comment section below, because I'd love to help you out with that. Or I just want to know, like, if there are people who are studying more niche languages, because if there is, I'll make a video talking about Language Reactor. But today I just want to talk about Migaku, or predominantly Migaku. Just Language Reactor is a bit more finicky because it's reliant upon Anki. It doesn't have its own like software, flashcard software built within it like Migaku. Basically, with Migaku, you use it and then you have access to the flashcards within the software. Like, it's all a part of Migaku. You don't have to download Anki or like export your flashcards the same way that you do with Language Reactor. I hope I haven't lost any of you here, by the way. Just trying to I think I did get into a bit of a rant with Migaku Language Reactor, but I'll scale out for a second and just explain the use case for these tools particularly first. So what is Language Reactor and what is Migaku, like, at least in terms of using it for immersion? Basically, there are these two tools in which you can have dual subtitle support for the content that you immerse in. So for Language Reactor, there's dual subtitle support, such just, you know, it's more than just dual subtitle support, because you can also immediately look up what a word means simply through hovering your mouse over the word in the target language, and it'll pop up and tell you, oh, well, it's this, it means that in English. You can click on it in the case of Language Reactor and it'll give even more details. And with Language Reactor, you can like mark the word as studying, ignore it, or like mark it as known. Regardless, it'll connect it to the database within Language Reactor. And not only does it do that just for that word, but it captures the whole context in which you specifically flagged that word. So if I'm immersing in a show and I either click the word as known or the word as studying, what will happen is that will be sent to the database. The word will, the whole sentence will, a photo will be taken of the screen, and fingers crossed, this only really happens when I'm watching like a native created show or movie in Thai, for example, on Netflix. Because if I've tried immersing with the news before on YouTube, and what happens, it'll give this robot voice instead. So what happens is it'll export it onto the database. Oh, no, it's within the database, so I don't think it's too much of a process from that. Export, whatever. And what you need to do is, after that, you export it from that database, and you're able to basically create flashcards from the file in which you exported with all the media that's necessary. But that's the whole long-winded process that I'm talking about with Language Reactor. You don't have to do that with Migaku. What happens is, as soon as you say the word... Actually, it's more of an intentional process with Migaku. You have to send the card to a card creator. And once you've created the card, that'll be within its own flashcard software. So if you know a word already and you don't need to create a flashcard for it, you can just mark it as known within Migaku. I think it's a bit more fluid with Migaku and more intentional, because with Language Reactor, for example, I can just spam my mouse, right-click my mouse, and just like save every word that I see, and then easily do it like that. However, I think with old Migaku, you're able to mass/batch export. I still would not suggest looking into that. That's what I think Jouzu Juls actually promotes within his YouTube videos, is he talks about batch exporting. However, personally, from my experience, the connection you get with the flashcards that you export is less, it's less personal. And so what I like to do is, when I'm immersing, I really want the word to personally be connected within my context as much as it can, to where it's not just batch exporting a bunch of unknown words within a particular text without, me having much of a connection to those words in that particular context, and just, not enjoying doing them as flashcards later. But so, whilst Language Reactor is a bit more of a long-winded and tedious process to export flashcards, Migaku is really simple by comparison, but it is more intentional, so you have to press buttons and wait more than you would for Language Reactor by comparison. But I'd still choose Migaku's functionality over Language Reactor. If Migaku had support for Thai, I'd basically be using Migaku right now. Not to shit on Language Reactor at all, but it's just for my context, I vibe better with the Migaku software, and even with the flashcard software even more than Anki. Anki feels a bit old and, for lack of a better word, ghetto. So Language Reactor unofficially feels like a ghetto version of Migaku, but I think it existed before Migaku, so I don't really want to shit on Language Reactor that much. So yeah, basically what you can do with these two softwares is, whilst you're immersing in any particular content, I will make a point for Migaku as well. You can use Migaku with more than just YouTube and Netflix. You can use it with Disney Plus. I think you can use it with another service called Rakuten. What's it called? Viki. I think it's Viki. I've never used that streaming service properly before, so I could have just not brought that up, but there's more functionality and more of a use case. And because Migaku's not ghetto, what you can do is you can watch a YouTube video, create a flashcard, and the audio will actually be captured. It won't be some fucking robot reading the shit. The audio will not fail to capture with Migaku, whereas, it's hit or miss for Language Reactor depending on exactly what you're watching. If you're watching something that for some reason doesn't jibe well with the Language Reactor database, once the information's captured, the audio will just be transferred to being a robot. Like it won't just be from the native source material. Okay, so what I do is every time I study Thai, for example, I just immerse. I use Google Chrome because these two apps, I don't think they're used frequently or really with any other browser software. So I use Google Chrome. I just downloaded I downloaded both of these softwares from the Chrome Web Store, and I'll enable Migaku whenever I'm studying anything outside of Thai, but for the most part, I'll just have Language Reactor there. I'll turn it on when I'm ready to immerse in Thai content. And so for the settings that I've set up for myself, I watch everything with dual subtitle support. However, I blur out the English subtitles and I'll only hover my mouse over it to reveal that if I need more context for enjoyment purposes. And also sometimes it can reveal certain grammatical trends easier once I actually get the English translation, which sounds really random, but after how long I've connected with Thai, I can watch it with dual subtitles and still feel like I'm acquiring quite a lot of information. Whereas if you spoke to someone on the level of like maybe Matt versus Japan, at least based from his like older videos, he would probably not support the idea of watching any target language material with dual subtitles or with English subtitles whatsoever. I basically, though, just use these softwares because dual subtitles is better than just watching in English subtitles. I would not suggest doing that. I've never really done that before. And I wouldn't suggest for you to do that unless you wanted context of a show or a movie before watching it, again, purely within the target language subtitles instead. Still, though, considering that you'd probably have dual subtitle support regardless, so it's like I'd rather kill two birds with one stone and just use that. That's the use case for both. I can definitely, and I will definitely record a video of me using either software. Mainly just Migaku, though, in its current state. I don't export anything to Anki. You'd have to be using the legacy version of Migaku to be able to do that. But it's a bit, I don't know, for me, I've never done that before, so I don't want to write it off, but Jouzu Juls has had a connection with it since he started learning Japanese. I think that's simply just because back then when he started using Migaku, I don't think the newer version was out, or if it was out, it wasn't as polished as it is now, in my opinion. So yeah, basically in another video separate from this one, I will have footage of me going through using Migaku. But I just needed to preface these tools because these tools are game changers. It's quite literally what has allowed me to enjoy the process of immersion and then not stress about having to then come out of immersion or pause during immersion to write down one word and then search it up and go off like on all these other tangents just to like acquire a certain piece of, and yeah, I guess you could say that's a bit more intentional. But when you're a beginner in a new language and you're kind of like just having these moments where you'll pause and you'll be like, okay, well, what's that word? And then you search up and it's like super irrelevant and you don't want to, oh, fuck's sake. So I cannot believe this shit has happened again. Now it's been 2 times and I'm kind of annoyed, but I've had to wait for my camera. I think this time I waited about 10 minutes for it to cool down, and I'm assuming this will be me wrapping up the rest of the video anyway, so I won't really have much else to really talk about outside of, exactly what I was talking about. And notes that I took regarding what I was talking about before. My camera randomly just decided to be like, yo, let me chill out for a second, bro, was that using a software such as Migaku or Language Reactor to automate the whole process of needing to do stupid shit manually, like searching up every single new word or foreign concept that you're not aware of within the language yet, and then needing to create a flashcard for each word manually. And that's just if the word or concept that you searched up about is actually worth your time, because if you make a flashcard manually that, you know, you're not connected with whatsoever, you will begin to not enjoy the process, because it kind of takes away from the process, if I'm going to be completely honest. I've tried it, and I tried it with Thai when I first started learning it. I went on this trip to Thailand for the first time last year in May, and I came back, and I was learning Japanese at the same time, but then I was just like, nah, I love Thailand, I love the people. So what I wanted to do is, at least for a month, I, instead of focusing purely on Japanese, tried to start with Thai. But I was like, okay, well, where do I start with Thai? You know, I don't have Migaku. And that's when I found out about Language Reactor, because I only knew about Migaku through Jouzu Juls and I think one or two other YouTubers. I'm pretty sure it was just Livakivi, but I'm not sure how you pronounce his name. I'll link both Jouzu and Livakivi in the description, their channels, because they really helped me. You know, if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't have understood, oh shit, well, Migaku, it's brought up quite a lot. And I used to like really hate sponsors when it came to language learning videos, because it's just like, oh well, it's just going to be like another language learning app. And I think this is what ties back into the point in which I brought up about Pimsleur at the very start, was I felt like using language learning apps ended up just becoming a waste of time. It became dull, the whole process, even through using Pimsleur, which I thought was going to be my savior, just ended up being problematic, wasn't fun. But now that I've finally stumbled across a tool such as Migaku, even possibly classifiable as a language learning app, it by far and wide margin is the best thing that I've used, because the best aspect of the whole journey for me using tools such as Language Reactor, such as Migaku, is the freedom that it enables you. Every other language learning app that you engage with is kind of barred behind the setup. Even with Duolingo, there's a fixed vocabulary set, there's fixed words that will be taught to you from the first levels going on to the very last levels within a language. And, you know, it's really hit or miss. That's the problem, is there's a lot of hit or miss aspects of it, in where it's like you still have to go through the lesson and then pass that specific sentence. You know, like that's the problem for me, is through using that app I felt very barred behind needing to know that, otherwise I can't progress forward. And with immersion, you know, you can watch a show, and if a sentence is too convoluted or complex, you're just like, oh shit, okay, anyways, and still watch the show. You know, you can just keep going. There's no pause between that. There should be a pause maybe if stuff seems to like resonate, or there might be comprehensible input for you to create a flashcard off of. But that's the freedom that it enables you, is you're not barred behind needing to learn what the software kind of presents for you beforehand. You're given like the freedom of being able to select every flashcard that you create, that every word that you track or classify as known. Like, there's so much customizability behind it. Sometimes it can become almost like too expansive in how much freedom it gives you, to where you don't really know what to do. But I feel like for me, with my experience with using the tool for a while, I've very much been able to connect to it on a more personal level and use it in a far more efficient way and effective way that suits my needs and will likely suit other language learners' needs as well. Just, it's all setting based, and I guess it's my perspective towards how I actually acquire Thai at the moment. But any language that I'd choose to acquire, whether that be Japanese, Mandarin Chinese, Vietnamese again, I can apply these same mindsets to the whole process and Migaku and its ability to save all these flashcards within the database in which I can go through. The best thing about it is when you go through the flashcards, specifically on Migaku, you have so much context. You have so much context, and that's the thing, is it's so far different from these other language learning apps which will give you completely just robotic sentences that are generated, like I drink milk or something. Like when I remember I learned, I went onto Duolingo for 2 or 3 days, tried to learn Indonesian right before I started learning Vietnamese, and yeah, it taught me I drink milk or some shit. I can only remember what milk was, which I think was susu or something. But regardless, it's just I don't care, and neither does my fucking brain, neither does my nervous system, and that's why that information is gatekept, because my nervous system ain't opening to that shit. Neuroplasticity ain't gonna be happening to some irrelevant dumb shit that I don't even care about. If I don't care about it, and that's a feeling that I can't change within, I can't just cultivate interest, oh my god, and really jump up and down over that information. I genuinely don't care, and I'm sure you don't as well. So if you're engaging with Duolingo and it gives you those stupid fucking sentences like that, you don't have the freedom of being able to just fucking be like, okay, and then move on. You have to kind of fucking grind through it, and that's the biggest problem. Same with Pimsa. If you want to ignore it, yeah, you can consciously ignore it or skip ahead. But the thing is, the shit's going to get repeated. So I hear fucking Suizoku-kan repeated again. I'm just like, you could have used any other fucking word or any other context, but realistically, it's just the way everything's set up. It's set up in this way, and where it's you need to get through it. When you're watching a TV show trying to acquire the language that way, there's far less of a stress of needing to get through absolutely every sentence, What I do is when I immerse, I literally just watch the show like normal. I'll have the dual subtitles up, depending on my level right now with Thai. It depends on, also you can choose which, this is a really good point to keep in mind, is choosing to watch a TV show or movie or news or whatever you use as immersion content to kind of suit your level. However, that's not the most important variable. The most important variable to me, and always will be, enjoyment. If you're not enjoying the process, if you're not even enjoying the show that you're watching, you're going to hate the process. You're going to hate the time that it takes to acquire a language, because guess what? It still takes a really long time, but it's far more enjoyable and it's far better than trying to consciously study every rule with limited... This is the problem, is what immersion does. It gives you so much context, so much information at once for so many senses. Actually, it's really only visual and audible senses, but it engages with them on a completely new level, to where you're getting exposure. In the case of subtitles, it depends if you want to turn subtitles on or not, or if you just want that listening experience. You get the context of the subtitles, you're watching maybe if you're just watching a TV, it'll be harder if you're watching the news. But even then, you have the context of understanding that it's the news, and that's information. You know, you can't. For me, if well, it's hard to explain. Like with Duolingo and Pimsleur, sometimes the situational context that was being talked about in like one or two, three different examples, or no, one or two conversations back and forth between like two people or whatever, it would just switch. It would switch the context, be like, oh, well, let's say you're doing this now. There's like still some general context behind it, but it's like more, I don't know, I didn't enjoy the process as much, whereas, you know, with just immersion and being able to use Migaku or Language Reactor, depending on your needs, is like you can have access to the subtitles, you're getting that, and if you want to export flashcards off of that, you can do that very easily. What else do you get? You get the visual context of what's going on, with people conveying and communicating through their actions, through their fucking so through their gestures, through their facial expressions. You can see if they're happy, if they're sad, if they're angry. All these emotions give context behind what they're going to talk about. So even if you don't understand the words that they're saying, you can get the context before they've even opened their mouths. But if you're just engaging with something like Duolingo, where it's very robotic, emotionless, just the words are spoken aloud with no emotion or no emotional context to back up what the speaker's saying, because it's a fucking robot speaking, or maybe it's a person, I don't know. Regardless, there's not that context on display for you, quite literally. Like, you don't have that visual, the communication from the visual source is not there for you, so you're not going to have that as further context to be able to assume. And it's not just a process of assumption, but it just opens the doors for acquisition. So the more senses that you're engaging with, the more information that actually adds to the experience of being able to just fundamentally acquire the information is more. So thus you are literally risking to acquire the information that's on screen, the language that you're studying, more likely than not. That's the thing. But then again, it does depend on what level within the language. For me, I'm not going to lie, Thai is one of the most simple languages I've come across in terms of certain grammar concepts and words being used so frequently, and like particularly like really long words in English. So I don't even think the word friendship is long per se, but like in Thai, for example, it uses 3 different words to make that word, and at least learning the other words in isolation before learning that big compound word, it was just fucking easy for me. I seen it and I was just like, oh, well, that's easy. So I think Puan means friend, Ben means to be or is, and Kwam Ben Puan, I think it's Kwam Ben Puan means friendship. I can't explain what Kwam is, in all honesty, but it is like a very concurrent and constantly like it's constantly shown. It's repeated a lot in different other contexts. I can explain it in the context of Thai. I can't explain it in the context of English, because there's no other word like it in English. Basically what happens though is generally when it's used with other words, it turns it into like a noun, but I don't want to get into like super deep detail about it. I didn't even have to study. The thing is, the language is so simple by comparison of Japanese, and I'm not trying to shit on Thai saying that it's superficial language whatsoever, but compared to Japanese, basically every language is fucking superficial, to where it's like you would need to fucking research. You would need to watch videos. You would need to watch a structure course in the case of Kuadoli's structure course to even be able to understand what the fuck is going on with Japanese before you even started really immersing or trying to ponder about certain concepts that were coming up again and again. Because you wouldn't be able to differentiate. It would just be too difficult, too deep. Whereas with Thai, I feel like the really important grammar concepts come up quite frequently and can be distinguished. However, I still have needed to search and inquire about certain concepts just for clarification purposes. But yeah, like, I don't know how to explain it. It's just like when you're immersing, there's so much on display that there's a higher risk for acquisition, and even acquisition over grammar concepts, to where it's like if I was studying Thai through Duolingo or through Pimsa, there would be far less of a likelihood for me to pick up on certain concepts like kwam, making a noun, making of, I think it's used with verbs particularly, to make that verb into like the noun version of it. I wouldn't be able to pick up on that concept whatsoever, whether that be known as a piece of vocabulary. I don't think it's used in isolation. That's the thing. It would be equivalent to like seeing this is just, it's not a direct comparison to English, by the way, but it's like running, jumping, gliding, all the ings at the end. It would be like if I got rid of the verb and then put the ing. Like, saying ing doesn't mean anything in English, you know. And it can't inform upon that actually. It's not a word separate. Same with kwam. Even though both sounds have different functions. I'm not trying to connect the functions whatsoever because they don't have the same function. It's just an example. So, yeah, but I don't even want to go deep into that because it's not relevant. Basically, though, you're risking acquiring the information more reliably through immersion than you would using something that doesn't give you as much visual and audible context. So we've covered the alphabet / subtitle support. You get connection to the written language. You get connection to the visual context of what's going on within a particular scene or whatnot of like a TV show or a movie in which you're watching. Or, and I don't think it's particular, it's just like something you'd know going into it is like what the show's about. And if you've watched the show, for example, I'm saying show because it's really the only things that I watch. I don't really watch movies. Like for me, if I'm watching a show, I'll probably know the context of it. If I've watched the show before, that's even more context. And when you have even more context and you're trying to study the language and there's certain words that you come across again, it's just easier to acquire it through repetition like that and through just knowing what's going on. It's like the people talking in the context, and if you don't understand what they're saying, you'll generally understand the context, and thus you will probably be able to hear certain words that you might have already tracked before, used in a different context. Oh, and that's what it means in that context. Like, seriously, that's literally just what happens, and it's such a fun process. I swear to fucking God. If it wasn't for Migaku or Language Reactor, it would be such a hard time doing this shit. Even watching it, like, just simply because of the dual subtitle support, but not just because of that, because of the ability to single out each word. And I will be completely honest, it's not reliable with absolutely every translation. Like, a character might just go, or like something, the equivalent in English, and then it'll come up in the written language in Thai, for example. Like, oi is said kind of like, that's not a fucking word, it's just an exclamation, people making sounds and shit. So, like, you have to be mindful of that whilst using it. But outside of the visual context in which you're getting the written language, the visual context of what's going on, and I guess part of that is also like the characters and how they're expressing themselves. I guess that can be like another point though, because it's just more context within the context. And then audibly, you know, you hear the words they're saying, and you can connect it more with the written language every time you hear it again and again and again. What other thing audibly? I think because I've had this discussion before about senses with immersion. I had like another point or two, but like just breaking the whole consensus of language acquisition down to just engaging with your senses more, to just set yourself up to subconsciously acquire the information. It's like, this is the best thing you can do. And through having support in the case of Migaku or language reactor, depending on the language of choice, target language which you're using or in which you're studying, these tools will dramatically help immersion, the enjoyment process of everything. You know, you'll be able to very quickly create flashcards from that. Then when you go into your flashcards later, you can see the context of a flashcard that you would have created, and then over time, you know, you just get that constant repetition of going through your flashcards every day, and connecting with the word over and over and over again, remembering the exact context, how the character says stuff, if it's just one character speaking, you know, just so much context. You get the freedom of personalizing the whole experience far more than any other language learning app. And I wouldn't even really call either Migaku or Language Reactor apps per se, or Anki. I guess Anki is an app, so you can throw it in there. But I will not lie, people use Anki very wrong and outside of the context of immersion. So this video is not going to cover downloading flashcard decks off the internet. I'm just going to say right now, don't do that shit. I've done it before. It's so like, there is no personal connection to the new words that you're studying. You should not be just learning new words from your flashcard software. You should be getting exposure to the words via immersion first, and hopefully from that being able to create a flashcard using the software, you know, on the go. You can literally just, it's a fucking click of the button. Both with Migaku, you just press Q. I think you hover over the word and press Q, and it'll automatically create the flashcard in the background. It'll have to like replay though. And then with the Language Reactor, you know, literally just right click that shit and it'll fucking work. So yeah, these two tools, extremely useful. I'll have to make a video in future going through them. I just really wanted to talk about them within this video and generally go over them and compare them to the other language learning apps in which I've used before, because I guess that, and then by that logic, then I can be like, oh, well, Netflix is a language learning app and so is YouTube. Like, anything can really constitute to be a language learning app, but I think generally, maybe from your experiences of language learning apps, if you've ever had any, you'll start to think of stuff like Duolingo, Babbel, even Pimsleur, all that fits that kind of use case / description. And yeah, unfortunately for me, they never really took me anywhere. But I'm so glad that I've gotten to this stage and where I'm using these tools that genuinely connect me with the language of the target language of whatever language that I'm going after, whether it be Thai, whether it be Mandarin, whether it be Japanese, Vietnamese, anything. I'm able to enjoy the process far more than I ever would be using any language learning app, period. So yeah, I just wanted to talk about this, and I don't think I talked about it that much in yesterday's video. So yeah, I'll have to make a video in future covering probably just Migaku for now. But, you know, from this comment sections, I'll be able to inform if anyone is using Language Reactor. If anyone's using any particular method that they're struggling with right now, please let me know in the comments. I'd really love to hear that. Yeah. This has been Arkin, I guess. I don't really have anything else to talk about, so I guess I'll leave it for tomorrow. If I record tomorrow, which I think I should. So catch you then.